Most people think they're suffering because life is hard, but a lot of us are suffering because we're suffering about our own suffering. Came across a quote the other day. I don't know where I saw this, so I can't really give credit where credit is due, but it really made me think, and that's the title of the video today. And it's where's it at? Suffering plus self-hatred equals compounded suffering. It's pretty powerful. So, let's talk about this idea of compounding first. So, if any of you are into investing or have read about investing or watched videos about investing in the stock market, for example, you've probably heard of compound interest. And compound interest is this idea that the longer that you invest month over month, the more that your money will grow and it will start to compound. That's why they say, start investing as early as you can, because if you put money in, over 10 years, it will grow, you know, at a whatever the rate is, and so it just gets more and more every single month. And the next year that you go to invest, it's growing and it's multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. This is why credit card debt is so hard to get out of, because you use credit and you go to make your payment and you see that your payment that's due is a little bit more than you can afford, so maybe you wait. And then now you're past due and you get fees tacked onto it and you get interest added onto that payment. So now when you go to make that payment 2 months later, it's even more than it was the first month. And the third month is even more than the second. And every single month that you try to make a payment, you can't keep up because it keeps growing, it keeps compounding. The same thing happens with our suffering. So let's ask a question here. What's hurting you more? Your pain or your reaction to your own pain? We'll get into this a little bit more here. Let's talk about this idea of primary versus secondary suffering. So, I'll give you a few examples of primary and then I'll give you a few examples of secondary suffering. Primary suffering is rejection, embarrassment, physical pain, humiliation, right? Loss, even depression, so on and so forth. And, failure, right? Your business could fail. You could fail a test. You could fail a grade. Those are examples of primary suffering. Examples of secondary suffering are, I can't get over her. Why can't I just be like everyone else? I'm pathetic. Why is this bad thing happening to me? Does that make sense? It's kind of like rumination. In psychology, they talk a lot about rumination. And if you don't know what rumination is, the most simple way to put it is that it's persistent worry. It's a cyclic negative thoughts, cyclic negative thinking, if you will. So that begs the question, why does this happen? Because people don't hate themselves because it's fun or they enjoy it or it feels good necessarily. I believe it's because it's a logical thing that we do. We think maybe if I punish myself hard enough for this failure or this, person leaving me or for being made fun of, if I punish myself, um, I won't do that thing again or I won't experience that pain again, right? And that creates a negative cycle, which then compounds itself. You um, you flunk a test, and then you tell yourself you're an idiot, and you tell yourself you're lazy because you didn't study for the test, and then you go on about your life, and then those thoughts creep into your subconscious, and they start forming an identity, which we'll talk about identity next. Um, and so then a couple of weeks go by, and you turn in your assignments late, and you half-ass them because you told yourself that you were lazy or you weren't a good student or that this always happens to me and I've always had difficulty with school, and then you fail another test or get a unsatisfactory grade on something, and then the cycle repeats, and so on and so forth ad infinitum until the chain is too heavy to lift, right? And that's really cruel that we do that to ourselves. So, a lot of times people will confuse an experience, like I was just saying. They will confuse an experience for their identity. I'll give you some examples of what that looks like. I have made a mistake long enough, therefore I am a failure. Or excuse me, I have made a mistake long enough. I've made these mistakes over and over, therefore I am a mistake. I failed over and over again. I failed at something, therefore I am a failure. I'm anxious all the time, therefore I am an anxious person. I am a person that lives chronically with anxiety, right? That was my personal narrative for a long time. And identity is nothing to play around with. It's very powerful. Right? I read a book several years ago to go back to this idea of anxiety. I read a book by Maxwell Maltz called Psycho-Cybernetics. I think it's by Maxwell Maltz. But Psycho-Cybernetics is the book. If you want to look it up, I highly suggest reading it. It was transformative for me, very profound. And it talks in the book about identity and how powerful it is. And the book talks about, one thing that stood out to me was the book talks about how stuttering becomes a lifelong thing that somebody does. And so if you have two children and they both have a stutter, and the parents take the children over to their family members or their friend's house, and the child hears their parents telling the other parents that the child is a stutterer. This forms an identity in the child's mind, and that child will go on to be a stutterer, which is someone who has a stutter. Versus the parents that say, my child has a stutter, and the children hear that language instead of the labeling, and guess what happens? Those kids grow up and eventually outgrow their stutter because it's not their identity. It's not their character, right? It's not who they are as a person. It's just something that they do. So, identity is very, very powerful. Um, we've probably all heard the thermostat theory. If you're into psychology at all or any of the stuff that I'm talking about, you've probably heard about like the thermostat stuff, where if you set a thermostat to 70 degrees, once it starts um, getting hotter in the house, the thermostat will automatically turn on and cool the room back down to 71 degrees, right? Um, People are like that. So if, let's say, I like to use this example. If you say to people, I am a terrible cook. I'm a terrible cook. I always burn everything. I overcook everything. I always burn the cookies. I burn the beans. My steaks are always like super well done. I just don't know how to cook. I'm terrible at cooking. I'm a terrible cook. You're labeling yourself as someone who always is a terrible cook. So what's going to happen is you're going to forget to follow the directions at some point when you're cooking. And you're going to live out that title that you give yourself. As long as you tell yourself that you're a terrible cook. You're a terrible baker. Even if you go take classes, you might start getting a little bit better. You might start getting a lot better. But if you don't change your identity, and every time you're at cooking class, your coach tells you you're really getting better. You're getting a lot better at this. And you try to shut it down and you won't accept it because you still think that you're a terrible cook. You're going to go back to your old habits, just like the thermostat. It's going to get too hot in the room and it's going to have to cool itself down back to its original temperature, i.e. your identity. And that's something that's really interesting, right? Tony Robbins talks about it. If you think in your mind that you're worth a $50,000 a year income, then you might get a job making $100,000 a year or start a business making that much money. But if you don't change the belief system in your identity, you will do something to mess that up and get yourself back to what's comfortable for you and what's your identity. Because if you don't do those things, then your psyche feels like you're lying to it and you're an imposter and you're being somebody who you are not, which is really fascinating to me. So let's do a quick thought experiment here, and then I'll leave you guys with a quote that I think is pretty cool. If your friend messed up or did something or experienced some sort of suffering, maybe the same suffering that you're going through, that you're beating yourself up over, that you're condemning yourself over, and if they were going through the same thing, would you tell them that they're a loser and that they always mess things up and that they're never going to be able to get over their ex and that it's all their fault and they always mess things up, etc., etc., etc.? Or would you probably tell them, like, hey, this thing happened to you, you had a negative experience, but like that doesn't change anything about you, just pick up and get back on the horse, deal with it, learn to accept what happened and think through it, but like, don't beat yourself up over it, man. Like, it's just something that happened, right? It's very cruel to think about that we do those things to ourselves. And if we think about ourselves and we put ourselves through a lens as if we were talking to a friend or a loved one, a lot of times we wouldn't say the things to ourselves that we do, because we wouldn't say those to our friends if they were going through the same thing. So, I'll leave you with one last quote, and then I hope this helps, and perhaps you will take what I'm saying and just observe your life and observe when something happens to you, or when things happen to other people, and maybe apply this. So, life will hurt. Life is going to hurt you. Don't recruit yourself to finish the job. Thank you guys. Stay blessed.